Hello everyone and welcome to another exciting episode. Today I'm diving into a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Prepare to be enchanted by a story of desire, betrayal, and many unexpected twists. Imagine a sun-drenched Mediterranean paradise, a place where passions boil like summer air. This is where our story unfolds. We meet a couple, seemingly in love, whose lives seem to be perfect. But beneath the surface of this idyllic picture lies a secret world of temptation and deception. Believe me, the situation is about to take a dramatic turn. You won't believe what shocking discoveries and stunning surprises await you. So, get ready to get caught up in a web of intrigue as we unravel this scandalous story together. Let's dive in. Tell me everything. Prologue. Caldetas d'Estrac is a sleepy little Catalan town 30 minutes north of Barcelona. Irene and I traveled there to visit a place from my past, the Hotel Colón. I used to stay there in my younger days. My memories were of a dusty old building from a Carlo Ponti movie, where I spent 2 weeks on a sun-drenched terrace, drinking Pernod with a bunch of even dustier Brits. Over the past almost 20 years, the old building has been demolished. A new hotel had been built in its place, but the beach was just as I remembered it, and Irene's view was worth a few days in the sun. She's American like me. But her entire family comes from this region. That's why her huge dark eyes combined with her thick russet hair make her truly Spanish. Her Catalan background probably also explains her Agustina de Aragon warrior mentality. She is lovable to the core. Her glory is her face. Her features are so perfect that she doesn't need to emphasize them with makeup. And then there's her body. Nevertheless, the first thing any out-of-breath man would notice is her figure. Irene has very broad shoulders. Some women would be embarrassed to look at such a figure. All the men's eyes were on her as she walked with beautiful bronze skin like a Greek goddess. During our 11 years of marriage, we had developed a special relationship. And frankly, I have never doubted her fidelity. Skeptics might say, yeah, right, given her physical build. But you have to understand her to understand why I trust her unconditionally. In essence, she is a person of high intelligence, with the judgment, maturity, and personal integrity one would expect from a perfectly well-rounded person. She is also an incredibly beautiful creature. When I married her, while I had more mistresses than can be counted on the fingers of both hands, maybe it was this lack of experience that allowed her to give herself so fully to our marriage. Of course, you'd have to be a profound idiot not to notice that all the male attention was on her. Her bikini was dark blue, and her skin was golden brown. Such beauty probably hinders her, but it works wonders on the male population. As she lay in the hot Mediterranean sun, local guys walked back and forth past her. She knew they were looking at her. The amused look she threw at me from behind her bulgaris said she was playing her favorite game, annoying the male population. She's been a lifelong dancer, so she has no problems or inhibitions when it comes to showing off her beauty. She told me that she takes great pleasure in making guys stare, knowing that her bounty will forever be for me and only me. But seriously, it had a huge impact on me too. Now let's move on to the story on Irene's behalf. Oscar decided to stop at a place on the coast. He had been there when he was younger. It wasn't where we usually stayed, but he said it had a nice beach, and that was all it took to convince me. I love the sun. They say that exposure to it causes premature aging, but the feel of it on my skin is something I really like. There was a time when I was very shy. I didn't want anyone to notice me, let alone be ogled by every guy on the beach. But that shyness evaporated like morning dew. And for the next 6 years, just the thought of men looking at me made me feel good about myself. But the thing that set me apart from the rest of the newbies, or perhaps it would be more correct to say things, was my bust. At first, I hated them, as they killed my dream of becoming a professional dancer. On the other hand, they had other advantages. Many women hate evenings out with men. Most women tolerate it. Many even enjoy it. I'm in a special category that doesn't like it, but I love all aspects of evenings out. At first, I didn't understand these feelings. Then they horrified me. I was raised Catholic, and I remember as a teenager kneeling and praying for hours to be rid of this horrible curse. Then, 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, I experienced my first night out. The boy was gone, and everything happened within 2 minutes, but I was transported to another plane of reality, where my skin peeled, and all I could think about was doing it again. I wouldn't be understating it if I said I was a bit of a mess after that. But I had too much personal pride to just spend my evenings with just anyone. So once I had mastered the basics, so to speak, I pursued my one true interest, which was using men to get what I wanted. Oscar and I met in our early 20s. He had no idea of my history. In fact, I told him I'd never had a man before him, and he believed that outrageous lie. I made the whole thing up because I love him, and he's very rich. More importantly, I understand the male ego. In fact, he wasn't even my 20th man, but he seemed to want to think I was untainted. And who was I to mess with his illusions? Later, I'd think he could tell I'd had a lot of practice by my performance. But men are eternally naive when it comes to women in general, and their wives in particular. For example, he thought the 8-year age difference between us would be an obstacle to us getting together. In fact, that record belonged to my 53-year-old French tutor, with whom I spent a wonderful evening just a month after my 19th birthday. I thought he was the one, and of course from that moment on, I had very good academic results. Eventually, he told me about his wife, for he was French, but that experience introduced me to the difference between an ordinary evening and love. And as a byproduct, I also learned how easy it is to subdue any man, regardless of his age, to my charms. Before I met Oscar, I had no idea what it was like to be completely and exclusively with one man, and I loved the deep connection we created. So infuriating the locals is just a nice distraction, especially when the person you've decided to give all of yourself to is sitting 3 feet away from you in a chaise lounge, and we move back to Oscar. The group of guys checking out Irene were part of a group of locals who were sitting in a flock on the beach. Finally, an elderly Spaniard separated himself from the group, came downstairs, and politely invited us to a party that evening in the back of the island. I'm not a socialite, but seeing Irene in an expensive designer dress is always worth enduring all the agonizing conversations for the sake of the spectacle. So we made plans to go to the party that evening in our new Bentley GTC convertible. Irene's shoulder-length dark blonde hair is one of her best features. It is very thick. It is perfectly styled and frames her beautiful oval face with huge, appealing bedroom eyes. Her hair never seems to need maintenance. In fact, she can weather a hurricane and then put them back in her hairstyle, and she absolutely hates convertibles. So we drove to the hills near San Vicente with her, with the top down and her hair fluttering in the wind. It was one of those classic Catalan evenings, when the air was so soft and sweet you could feel it on your skin, and the sky burned with red gold highlights. She was wearing a modest amber suit that probably cost me a couple $1,000s. Needless to say, it must have stopped the hearts of all the men at the party. Another characteristic of my wife is her need to openly control men. I love it when some poor guy goes crazy on her right in front of me. If she likes a man, she will strut her stuff while dancing with him. She always comes back to me, but watching another guy fall under my wife's spell leaves me in a mixed state. I've actually asked her several times if she wants to go further. I know it's perverse, but it doesn't bother me. Irene loves me, and she is an incredible being. All men are mesmerized by a woman's attractiveness. We know that a woman creates captivating music if her body is properly played. However, the quality of the melody depends directly on the perfection of the instrument. And in this respect, Irene has always been a Stradivarius. So watching her in agony was like listening to a perfect concerto. The fact that I was letting some poor soul know what it was like to play my Stradivarius thrilled me greatly. I knew she was mine and mine alone. She bluntly stated to me that she doesn't want this. Ever. But I truly believe it's because she hasn't found the right guy. Since there were a lot of cute guys in the group gathered this afternoon, and all of them would be at the party, I was hoping that Irene would grant my heartfelt wish tonight. Irene is so stunningly beautiful that she attracts everyone's attention when she enters the room. The host himself rushed to make the introduction. I met many people I will never see again, but one woman caught my interest. She was almost as attractive as Irene, but she was like a photographic negative. Where Irene was short and swarthy, this woman was tall, lithe, and slender. She had a very long, thick, and beautiful sheaf of blonde hair that fell down her back. She had a killer tan and huge cornflower blue eyes in a round girl-next-door face. More importantly, she had lips as sensual as Irene's, which hinted at the fire blazing somewhere beneath the surface. Her body was like that of a tennis player. Broad shoulders, long strong legs, thin waist, and perfect form. We had time to talk because Irene was already on the dance floor. You don't marry a dancer and go to parties without expecting her to dance. And I'm a terrible dancer, which probably has to do with the fact that I hate all aspects of it. So years ago, we came to an agreement. She would dance and I would stand and drink. Irene has amazing moves. That's why every man at the party was lining up for a chance to dance with her. I have to admit that the way she dances has always fueled my thoughts. It's because I want other guys to know firsthand what kind of woman my wife truly is, and the fact that I'm her one and only man is further proof of my innate superiority. Let's move on to Irene. I don't know if I dance because it's been an integral part of my life, or if it's the real need to move that led me to become a dancer. But the description from A Chorus Line is quite applicable. Lord, I am a dancer, and a dancer dances. The desire to move has always been a part of me, so as soon as the music starts, I have to dance. As we walked towards the house along the brick-inlaid path, I could hear the rhythm. The house itself was very impressive. And when it comes to wealth, I'm one of those who has seen it all. It was built on top of one of the hills that are part of the landscape of Catalonia. 2 stories high, whitewashed and clad in oak beams, with large stones as foundations. The windows in the main room of the house, which was to the left of the tiled and terrazzo lobby when we entered, were floor to ceiling. They offered a spectacular view of the sun, which was just disappearing in the distance. The music was provided by a professional DJ, using a sound system that must have required a nearby nuclear power plant to power it. The music was intoxicating, and I instantly rushed to the middle of the floor, throwing my hands behind my head, moving joyfully. When I dance, I don't so much choose my partners as they choose me. I start dancing alone, and then a guy or several guys or even women join me. That's what happened here too. My immediate partner was a very good-looking Spanish guy, maybe a couple years younger than me. He was part of a group on the beach. He told me that his father, whom we met, was the owner of this house. My partner was an incredibly nice specimen of masculinity. More importantly, he was an outstanding dancer. He was very responsive to the music, was agile and flexible, and put a lot of himself into his dancing. I dance to express myself, and if you observe me, you will get some insight into my deepest passions. The same can be said for men. This guy moved so fluidly and sensually that I knew right away he would be a great lover. We danced facing each other and then facing someone else. A few guys cut in, but he kept ending up in front of me. I got the impression he was more than a little interested, which was exactly what I wanted, because I'd already decided I was going to fulfill Oscar's fantasy tonight. Back to Oscar. I knew from years of experience that Irene wouldn't miss a beat for the next 4-5 hours, so I had some time to kill time, as strange as that sounds. Fortunately, there was plenty of good unblended whiskey to occupy my time, and a beautiful blonde to collaborate with. I could be enamored with my gorgeous wife. But that didn't mean I couldn't spend my hours with a very beautiful woman. And this woman was stunning, a healthy, clear-eyed, round-faced woman from the college cheerleading squad, the best women's organization on campus. She was American too. Her name was Eva. And she had a quirky sense of humor that made small talk enjoyable. Plus, the sight of those long, beautiful legs was like a flawless vision. We talked a little bit about our backgrounds. She was from Chicago. She was there with her husband, whom I had met earlier. I don't use the term asshole in jest, but in my humble opinion, if you look up the term asshole in the dictionary, it says, to see him. Eva's husband was there to sell his wares to the guy who was throwing the party. I'm probably richer than the owner, so I don't have to beg for money. But Eva's husband smelled of desperation. From the moment of our arrival, he had been attached to the elderly Spaniard like a lime tree. He laughed gaily and generally tried to dominate the small talk of the group of men gathered in the corner of the room. In college, he was probably a fullback or halfback. Now he was a doughboy, with a very short haircut to hide his impending baldness. My new blonde friend was clearly embarrassed by his behavior, but kept the conversation going. She told me that they didn't have children, but she would like to have them before she turned 35. She was now 32 years old, just like Irene. Before meeting her husband, she had served as a nurse in the Marine Corps and had risen to the rank of first lieutenant. She had also had time in Afghanistan. Her ability to thrive in such an alien and dangerous environment was very impressive. Irene had never stepped outside the privileged world she was born into. But I make my money in the shadowy realm of cybersecurity, so my new friend and I had a lot to talk about. Eva said she had enjoyed her time in the army and was a little sorry she had left, but she never wanted to go back to the sandbox again. After leaving the service, she worked at a hospital in Chicago. That's where she met her husband. From her story, he was intimidating rather than enticing her into marriage. When I asked her whether his aggressive courtship style should have told her something about their subsequent life together, she looked at me sadly. We had been drinking and chatting for a while when it hit me that my little Marine would probably want to dance. They were just starting a slow tune, and even though I was getting cramped on the dance floor, I could stand and wrangle from foot to foot with the best of them. I offered, and she accepted the offer with a timid, ironic thank you. I looked back. Her husband was still talking loudly, and the lights were glistening on his sweaty forehead, and Irene was dancing in the center of the hall with some lucky guy. Irene lay dreamily on his shoulder, wrapping her arms around his neck and playing with his hair. I'd already mentioned that Irene was my unconditionally loyal soulmate, but that didn't mean she didn't enjoy hunting men for sport. Like the cat she undoubtedly is, stalking prey is in her blood. Judging by previous experiences, the guy wasn't going to go any farther, but he would remember it for the rest of his life. Nevertheless, I could see that Irene was really enjoying today's hunt, and I wondered if she was planning to continue the hunt. So I left her with my best wishes. This guy was going to get this beauty for one night, while I had this gorgeous creature for life. It didn't seem fair. Let's move on to Irene. They were playing a slow song. I don't usually dance to slow songs, because there's no real dancing there, unless your partner knows real ballroom dancing, and most guys don't. But today's partner was particularly tall, handsome, and a great dancer, so I decided to raise his temperature a little as a reward. What would happen next depended solely on him. As I expected, what started out as a classic slow dance turned into a clinch almost immediately, and his interest was clearly rising. I gasped in surprise. It felt like a cannon, and little electric sparks began to skip across me. Some might think I was shameless, but in my opinion, there was nothing more pleasurable in that moment than the interaction between hunter and prey. There is something in my character that makes me like to screw over men for sporting interest. I haven't talked to other women about it, so I don't know if this urge is fundamental to our gender or if it's just fundamental to me, but I like to feel them respond. That's what I've been seeking. Oscar has been begging me to take things to their logical conclusion for some time now. I usually don't even think about it. After all, I really don't need confirmation of my attractiveness. The problem was a little different, and for the first time in forever, I was ready to fulfill Oscar's wish. In fact, dancing like this put me in a state of oblivion when I began to forget where I was and who I was married to. Back to Oscar. My partner started dancing with me in the usual slow dance manner, but she got into character very quickly. Eva's blonde head was on my shoulder, and she didn't say anything, but she was whimpering. She was alluring with the intoxicating scent of perfume. Her light body moved with mine, as if we were one. Her beautiful blonde hair hung down over my two hands. She did something to my neck. I thought, if it makes her feel better, it makes me feel better. At that moment, we were abruptly pulled away by her husband. He drunkenly grabbed her hand with the words, "Let's go, Eva." He was clearly not acting out of jealousy. He just wanted her to be with him, and immediately. To say it pissed me off would be an understatement, and to put it bluntly, she seemed to be scared of the guy when he did it. For a few seconds, I just stood there and watched. Then I turned around to see what Irene was doing. They were rapping now, and she was dancing back to back with the same man I'd seen her slow dance with. He was a couple inches taller than me, and maybe 10 years younger, and he was so handsome that he looked like a Spanish version of the Greek god Adonis. I also noticed that he danced in a way I had never seen a man dance before. Adonis took sublime pleasure in dancing with my goddess. She found herself next to me, and we exchanged a glance. Usually she had a twinkle in her eye. Today, however, her gaze was full of hunger. I thought, maybe she's really going to do this. She nodded slightly and went back to, It made me immediately uncomfortable. So I left the dance floor, trying to look like I didn't know something was projected 7 inches in front of me. I hurriedly sat down in Morris's chair against the wall, sipped my new drink, and watched Irene chatting with the guy. The wings of Morris's chair were the perfect cover for reconnaissance. After what I saw, I thought, maybe she is? It was getting very interesting. The dance ended, and Irene turned to her partner. She put her arms around his neck. He was much taller than her, so she had to stand on her toes to do it. Then she whispered something in his ear. His swarthy, handsome face lit up. They broke the embrace. She looked at him with the most intense look I'd ever seen. Then they both turned and strolled casually down the long marble hallway. If you had first seen them at that moment, you would have assumed he was just showing her where the restrooms were. But I suspected that it would actually end with me finally getting my wish. The house was shaped like a sledgehammer. We had Fun in the Head, which had huge floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Catalan hills. There were many rooms adjoining the pen. That was exactly where they were headed. The atmosphere between them was extremely hot. I followed. Peeping at them was easy. They were so engrossed that a herd of fighting bulls could have come rushing down the corridor, and they wouldn't have noticed. Then they suddenly disappeared into the room at the end of the hammer handle. I heard the door close, and the deadbolt click. I thought, oh shit. I knew she would tell me about it after it was over. But I wanted to get the full effect of this scene, so I had to find a way to peek into the room. I noticed a staircase. It led down to the garden. I thought, maybe I can watch through the window. I walked down the marble staircase and out into the night. Of course there was a balcony, and I knew there was a door leading to it. Now all I had to do was levitate myself 12 feet into the air. Where are the handy ladders, gutters, or trellises when you need them so badly? But underneath it was a 3-foot stone bench, and with my arms outstretched, I was a foot from the balcony ledge. I jumped and caught my foot on the railing above the balcony floor. Then, with a little swing, I was able to drag my foot onto the balcony and soared upward from there. At this point, I stealthily made my way to the balcony door, which was open to let in the night breeze. I understood that if I were to sneak around on someone else's balcony watching this couple, I could get arrested or get my ass kicked, even if the host was my wife. But in that moment, I was a maniac. I have no idea what drove my need. Maybe it was my wife's ethereal attraction. Maybe it was something else, or maybe I was just a pervert. Still, my heart was racing with anticipation, and I was sweating. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles. I saw my beautiful wife. She was lying on the bed, relaxed, and the candles were scented with jasmine. Irene looked as if she were placidly waiting. It was a dreamy sight. Her thick, dark blonde hair was neatly arranged around her beautiful face. As I watched, a man came out of the bathroom. From the looks of it, he was unspeakably happy to see her. The gardens were lit behind me, so I was standing in a brighter light than he was. I didn't want him to see me, so I crept closer to the balcony railing. Suddenly, I heard some loud voices right below me. Fuck! The DJ was taking a break and half the party was in the garden smoking. I was trapped. It doesn't take a genius of deduction to realize that an inconspicuous figure standing on the balcony might be more than a little alarmed. I also didn't want to humiliate myself by admitting to the local police that I had been standing there in the dark, watching the whole scene. It might make them wonder about me. So discretion is the better part of valor, and I crept behind the column. It wasn't the best view, but it ensured that no one below could see me. I had to cut a big chunk of the scene here, but I'll remind you that the full story is on Patreon. But then the music started up again, and everyone started to go back into the hall. Soon the garden was empty, and that was a good thing, because the Catalan night was suddenly pierced by an extended hypersonic howl. Irene's ending scream could have boasted a pack of coyotes. I saw something I've always dreamed of, and we'll talk more about it later. I admitted to myself that I had set it up, but I didn't expect it to be anything more than that. It never occurred to me that she could behave like that. Maybe I'm overconfident. Swinging over the railing, I heard her say with misgiving in her voice, "Not again! Not so soon!" I wondered how much I'd have to drink to forget about it. I wanted it to happen, and that was all I wished for. But I also expected it to be a short one-night stand, and that was it. I never thought she would enjoy it so much. As I landed and began to walk back into the house, the sounds from the room upstairs began to rise again, and she started screaming again. All I could think about was getting back to the party. I could still hear the two of them rumbling loudly as I passed the door to their room. After all, the guy was 10 years younger than me and built like an endurance runner. Suddenly, my little quirk seemed like the worst idea I'd ever had in my life. I was walking back to the main party, thinking to myself, now she'll never be satisfied with me. It just killed me, even though I had asked for it myself. I needed to get the animal sounds out of my head, or I was going to hop in the Bentley and disappear to an unknown destination. At that moment, I ran into Eva. She was sobbing in the same chair I had vacated when I went to fetch Irene. She looked so sad and hopeless that I forgot my troubles for a moment and walked over to her. I put my hand on her shoulder questioningly. She reacted as if I had hit her. Then she looked up, smiled through her tears and said, "Oh, it's you." She stood up gracefully, put her arms around my neck, and sobbed again on my chest. I put my arms around her and pulled her close to me. I was at a loss, not knowing what to do next. Finally, she stopped crying and said emphatically, "We need to talk." I led her out of the noisy party room and down a hallway. There were only bedrooms in this hallway, but there was also the garden I had just left. As I passed the door of one of the bedrooms, I heard voices. It sounded like they were finishing work. I looked at the clock. It had only been 2 hours in the jungle. My heart felt like it was made of stone. We got to a spot amongst the manicured shrubbery. I thought that Irene and I had never done anything for so long in our married life. I kept muttering to myself under my breath, "She wasn't supposed to like it so much." My little blonde friend asked, "What?" I smiled and replied, "Nothing. I was just thinking about one of the worst mistakes I've ever made in my life." She looked at me sympathetically and asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" I replied, "Not right now, so why were you crying? And we'll temporarily move on to Irene." When I finally came to my senses after such an experience in my life, I found that Oscar had completely disappeared. Roberto and I had been together for 2 hours straight, and for most of that time I was awkwardly out of control. But I knew Oscar was watching us. I could see him at dusk, standing behind the column. It reassured me. I'm very experienced in that way. But I couldn't have guessed that Roberto would turn me into an absolute crazy woman. When I came out, Roberto was gone. I dried myself off and started to put on my evening gown. Then I went in search of Oscar. I was ashamed of it, and I wanted to assure him that it would never happen again. Before I left, Roberto begged me to run away with him to Ibiza. He said he was dependent on me, but I know I belong to Oscar, and I'm not a man's plaything. So I told him no, that it was a one-time thing. I told him I was doing it for my husband and that I was Oscar's woman, not his. He looked disappointed, but I suppose there would be plenty of fish in the sea for such a stallion. Roberto's subsequent expression of relief told me everything I wanted to know about what I meant to him. And frankly, it meant even less to me. But there's a lot more to life than that. And, frankly, losing control is not the most pleasant feeling for a rational, educated woman like me. What's more, I wanted to make sure Oscar was okay with what had just happened. When I got back to the party, I looked everywhere. But Oscar was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, I was gripped by panic. A little voice in my head raged around, pointing a finger at me and shouting, "You just acted like a shameless fool in front of your husband, and now he's left you. What did you expect?" And then a terrible thought struck me. There was a woman at the party who possessed the kind of physical beauty that all other women envy. She was a gorgeous girl from the next yard, with exquisite hair and the perfect body of a glamorous model. I know my face and body are just as wonderful, but I'm completely different. Much shorter in stature, much better. I thought with horror, did you just take him into the arms of another woman? Would Oscar do something like that? The last time I saw the two of them together, she danced with him the way I did with Roberto. I'd never taken that kind of physical contact seriously. But from my brief conversation with her, I realized that she wasn't as dismissive of close dancing as I was. On the contrary, she seemed like one of those painfully sincere, all-penetrating girls who would probably fall in love with Oscar right on the spot. In fact, the last time I saw her, She looked at him like she wanted to have a baby with him. Oscar is my soulmate. We both know what we represent to each other. I was just doing what he'd been begging me to do for years. But even I had to realize that my behavior tonight was out of line. I'm over it now, for good. Once was an experience. Twice would have been an experience. There are more important things in life. Now I was thinking straight. Though Roberto begged me to run away with him, I could only think of keeping my husband. I ran to the window and looked out over the garden. No such thing. Now I really felt the impending terror. My stomach twisted at the thought of him somewhere in the house with that blonde beauty. He'd asked me, and I'd done it for him, perhaps a little more thoroughly and with more enthusiasm than we both expected. But Oscar knows I'm not that kind of woman. Moreover, I knew to my core that I would never do it again. I consider myself faithful within the boundaries we had set, and frankly, I couldn't bear the humiliation of behaving like that again. But I didn't urge Oscar to be with that fool. I can't think of any woman with such tendencies. Women are cats. We're just too attached to our men. The music started playing, and I raced back down the hallway. I intended to bang on every door in that hallway until I found them, and then I'd pull him out by his ear, and we'd never speak of this again. Then the enormity of what Oscar was doing overwhelmed me, and I lost consciousness for a moment. I sat down on a nearby chair to get my emotions under control. At that moment, a large man appeared in front of me. He said in a very kind and caring tone, "Are you all right? Here, have a drink. It will help you calm down." Let's move on to Oscar's fate. Eva turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "I have finally decided that my husband is a hopeless loser and that I am going to leave him. He doesn't love me, and he doesn't deserve me." I said, "I agree with that. You're a beautiful, wonderful woman and a much better person than he is. But why today?" What she said to me almost gave me a heart attack. She says, "My husband is willing to do anything to make the deal he's working on here. He's very competitive, and he hates to lose. He even told Miguel that he would let him spend the evening with me if he gave him the order he wanted. I told him he could have a great evening with Miguel, since I'm not going to touch either of them anymore." Then Eva added something that made my heart ache. She said, "Buck went to Miguel and told him not to worry. There's an even better hussy at the party, and he's got something that'll turn her into an obsessed fool on the run." Eva added, "He told Miguel that he's not going to get anywhere with me. I'm too uptight to be of any interest, but Miguel and his buddies can be with this other woman for the rest of the week." Then Eve stopped and looked at me. She said with a noticeable sympathy in her voice, "The woman they were talking about is your wife." It was like being struck by lightning. It was excruciating once. I asked for it, but it was never meant to happen again. I'm not the fastest guy in the world, but I got back to the main room at the speed of light. Eva and I had been in the garden for a long time, and I feared that the heinous crime had already been committed. When I got there, I thought I might have to contract for murder, because Irina was nowhere to be seen. I looked around with fear and anger. Then I saw her. She was sitting in a chair like an alert Labrador, the same one I had been sitting in when this whole sordid adventure began. An overwhelming relief swept over me. Then I saw that Ava's husband was just handing Irene a drink. I shouted, "Irene!" She turned around with a delighted smile. There is a course in basic training that should be called How to Fight Dirty. The goal is to make soldiers realize that their only goal in life and death situations is to incapacitate the enemy, not to be a gentleman. And this dude was a lot bigger than me. So instead of a fair fight, I immediately jammed the point of my elbow into the asshole. That blow always guarantees a long and unbroken sleep. And my desperate running and what I knew was about to happen only made the blow worse. The guy went down like the proverbial sack of potatoes. Even better if he wet himself. Glass flew. Irene screamed, "What the fuck?" And I told her in my calmest voice, "It's the roof." She looked questioningly at the old Spaniard. He stood with Eva's husband and looked at her expectantly. He was clearly waiting for Irene to take that fateful sip. He looked incredibly guilty, turned almost purple, and actually swallowed. Irene pondered this thought for 2 counts, and then without further ado stood up, did a little pirouette, and buried the toe of her 4-inch stiletto exactly between the left and right nut of the old Spaniard. Every man from generation to generation, all the way back to Adam, shuddered. Since Irene's legs are unusually strong, the guy threw up as he was passing out. Irene then did the same thing to Eve's husband, who lay nearly dead at her feet. This time the kick was more rocket style than ninja style, and she used her other leg. Ambidextrous is one of the perks of being a dancer. The only thing I thought of was that the scumbag got what he deserved. Then Irene walked angrily out of the house, clicking her heels loudly on the floor, and disappeared behind the door. Complete silence followed. I never thought people would stand there with their mouths open, but 70 people did just that. I shrugged and mumbled "roof" apologetically, then quickly followed Irene into the parking lot. We drove in silence for a long time. She was obviously still furious about the incident with the roof. Moreover, she was clearly trying to find the best way to talk about her humiliating experience. So I decided to start the game for her. I said, "I realize that I created the situation myself by encouraging you to do this. I don't think you would have done it otherwise, and so I must bear the blame for what happened. I don't hold you responsible for it." Then I added, with a little more harshness in my voice than I wanted, "But I was amazed at how out of control you were, and you said something that just ruined my manhood." Her perfect facial features turned to astonishment. She said with disbelief, "I said what?" Then hastily added, "You know I didn't mean what I said. I was practically out of my mind at that moment and could have said anything. I was just babbling." Then she added heatedly, "And I had absolutely no control over it all." She hesitated, then said, "I know what you're thinking. Yes, I loved every second of it." Then she made a grimace and said, "But would I ever do it again? Never, even if you begged me." She replied seriously, "There's a lot more going on in our marriage than just an evening out. And you can see the damage this little prank has done. You've always given me what I wanted. Never doubt that." Then she timidly took my hand and said, "You probably don't know this, because I haven't had time to tell you, but I thought you were spending time with that blonde Eva, and I was devastated. So please, from now on, no other people, just you and me. We'll stay with each other for the rest of our lives." She lifted my hand and kissed it. She said uncertainly, "We're all right, aren't we?" I thought about my feelings for a second, and there was nothing there but love. So I said softly, "We're good." Epilogue. We weren't sure what the consequences would be for Irene messing up the wedding tackle of an important local and his guest of honor. So that evening we set off 30 miles away to Barcelona. And to back us up, we booked ourselves and the GTC seats on the ferry from Barcelona to Genoa early the next day. I decided it would be a good idea to get out of town for a while before anyone started asking questions. No wonder we never heard from any of these troublesome people again. That's what I figured would happen. They'd have to keep too many of their own skeletons secret if they drag their feet on this case. What's more, all my mad impulses disappeared without a trace, and Irene and I resumed our very pleasant life as soon as we received the results of the harmful substances test. Are you surprised that I insisted on it? Irene told me he thought it was a bit hypocritical. I'm the one who started the whole thing in the first place. But it's better for both of us to be safe than sorry. 10 wonderful years have passed since that night. A year and a half later, our baby Brooke joined us, and Irene added great mothering to her already amazing skill set. Irene, Brookie, and I are traveling the world. My wife is still as stunning as ever. I often wonder what happened to Eva. I hope she divorced that creepy piece of shit and married the man of her dreams. She was a sweet, decent person and deserved so much better than what life presented her with. Wow, what a storm of emotions. We have just witnessed a story about desire, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships. A story in which the lines between love and obsession blur, forcing us to question the very nature of trust and commitment. Our main characters, Oscar and Irene, presented themselves as a seemingly perfect couple. But beneath the surface, there was a stormy sea of desires and insecurities. Oscar, with his insatiable desire for control, and Irene, the mysterious femme fatale, were locked in a complex power struggle, a dance of dominance and submission. Their actions, while shocking and morally ambiguous, provide a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human psyche. It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that paradise can often hide hidden turmoil. This story forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationships. It challenges our perceptions of love, loyalty, and the lengths to which we can go in pursuit of desire. Remember, this is just a story, a fictional exploration of the human condition. However, it reflects the complexities of real life, where passions can be both invigorating and destructive. As we reflect on this story, let's remember that healthy relationships are built on trust, respect, and open communication. And while desire is a powerful force, it should never come at the expense of another person's dignity or well-being. Let's continue the conversation in the comments below. Share your thoughts, theories, and reactions to this provocative story. And for those craving a deeper dive into unfiltered storytelling, check out the full version on our Patreon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.